Hey all, welcome back to Santa Cruz County's #1 Google Slides live stream, coming at you live and streamed from Rockingham Township, Vermont, yet again this week. And what I'm going to talk about this week is inspired by a book which I had the opportunity to read and review recently, Other Natures by Clara Bossick Schroeder, which was recommended to me initially by Joe DePage, the Classics Department's own alumnus Joe DePage. So we can consider this the Joe DePage Memorial Classic live stream. Before you ask, Joe DePage is fine. I just think it's good for us to try to remember it from time to time. Well, so what I want to say is this. You know how where we left off last time, we were talking about how Pliny says that humans and pearls are alike because they come in a lot of shapes, a lot of different shapes. Pliny says this is a weird feature of humans. That's even perhaps the most distinctive things about them, by distinction from other animal species, right? Because animal species are singular entities in themselves. You got your deer, your monkey, your elephant, your mouse, etc. Whereas humans, as an animal species, are plural. So there are basically as many different kinds of humans as there are kinds of animals, roughly speaking, in terms of scale. And this allows for a kind of a systematic parallelism between the two, which is absolutely key for getting the gist of what Pliny's talking about when he's talking about humans or animals. But it also raises this other question, one that Pliny addresses in his own way, as we saw last week, talking about twins and such. What is human diversity actually like? How do ancient thinkers think about, write about, describe the diversity of the human population? It's a pretty substantial diversity. There is one way that gets talked about a lot in modern discussions of this, which is this invocation of kind of monsters out at the margins of the worlds as reflecting human diversity or representing human diversity somehow. You've got, for instance, the gorillae encountered by Scylax of Carianda on his circumnavigation of Africa. You've got the Arimaspians, the one-eyed Siberians who fight griffins to get their gold. These populations that are in some physical way distinct from normative humanity. Now, these are interesting in all sorts of ways for how ancient writers think about the human physique and human normalcy, and also apparently of interest to the showrunners at My Little Pony, who did an entire episode in which the Arimaspians feature as a villain. But that's not really the main way of proceeding for ancient ethnography. This notion of monsters really does have a kind of a sense of the mythic to it. It's something that even the historians most prone to invoke monsters, and Herodotus is notoriously one of these, sort of push out to the very limits of the known world. It's not like people next door or people in Egypt or people in Thrace are described as monsters in this way. So monsters, one way of thinking about human diversity. A much more frequently encountered one is this discussion of different nomoi, different nomoi. And I mean not gnomes as in the garden variety, but this distinction between nomos and phusis, which is at the center of kind of the sophistical movement in Greek, in which in Athens, and which gets picked up by Herodotus in his own way. There is a distinction between nomos, which, as you know, if you've taken Greek, means a law or a convention or a custom, and physis, which is nature, coming to be. And the distinction is expanded by the sophists and later thinkers into one that basically polarizes rules that somebody just made up, something that we might kind of even translate as culture, and stuff that we can't change or do anything about. stuff that just exists naturally and is kind of unchangeable. So nature. It's not quite the same as the kind of culture-nature division, but it's close to that. It's like that. Similar kind of way of thinking about it, and for today's purposes, you're not going to be misled if you translate nomos and physis as culture and nature, respectively. So there's this view which Herodotus is one of the first to kind of set forth in all of its detail, that nomoi are basically infinitely variable. Customs can vary in an infinite range of ways. There's this famous encounter staged by the Persian king Darius in Herodotus' histories between a group of people who are supposed to live in India, who knows what exactly that refers to geographically, the Kalatii, and Greeks. And Darius says, hey, Greeks, will you, like the Kalatii do, eat your dead parents? And the Greeks are like, no way, that's gross. And then Darius asks the Kalatii, well, hey, will you set your dead parents on fire? And the Kalatii are like, no, that's gross, we got to eat them. So this is kind of an episode in Herodotus designed to show that nomoi are infinitely diverse. There's always, if a nomos can exist somewhere, it probably does exist. It's going to be a major topic in Herodotus and later ethnography, up through Bardaisan, the Syriac author that I discussed in an episode last season, who has this book of it's a book of the laws of the countries, and the word in Syriac for laws is namusa, which is just derived from nomos. It's just a Syriac vocalization of nomos. So an effect of this distinction and the study of diverse nomoi, the diversity of nomoi, is to kind of denaturalize local nomoi, the customs in which one has grown up, and one starts to think, well, can I just kind of borrow nomoi from other people if they've got really good nomoi? Like the Scythians have this nomos of not having houses and just wandering about, which makes them unconquerable. It's a pretty good nomos. Can we have that nomos? There will be Greek thinkers who will say, yes, let's have that nomos. Socrates famously says, well, the Spartans should have that nomos, and then they'd be really tough to beat. But the borrowing of nomoi kind of runs into an obstacle, which is that nomoi kind of form a system, right? A system that is not just a system of culture, but actually also intermeshes with nature. And that leads me to discuss the third way of thinking about human diversity that seems to be really prominent in ancient literature. That's this distinction of different bioi, or lives. Bios means life. It's a Greek word. It's often calqued by the Latin vita, which gets used in a lot of the same way. And this is the thing that Schroeder's book really explores in an interesting way. So what's the big deal about bioi? A bios is not the same as a nomos because it's not just about individual customs. It's about a system of customs, and it's about the way in which that system of customs allow people to live. So a bios, as a descriptive terminology, is fundamentally about how people get food, because everybody gets food somehow, whether it be from Golden Corral or Ponderosa or some other buffet type situation. So bios is once a consideration of the nomoi that people have, and a consideration of the way that those nomoi allow that people to survive in its environment. A bios then is kind of this ecological descriptor. And we can see this in the way that Aristotle discusses the term. It's a term that's prominent in Aristotelian discussions of human diversity, and also those of his followers in the peripatetic school, as we'll touch on a little bit as well. Aristotle says, well, the ways of dividing up human lifestyles have to do with the way that people get food. They get food from livestock, or from hunting, or from piracy, or fishing, or agriculture. All these different possible BOI that one can have correspond to different ways of getting food. And there's a certain linkage between those BOI and the known way that correspond to them. Different customs apply for nomads who wander about and don't have houses, then apply for agricultural people who are stuck in one place. So each of these different BOI is really a kind of an ecological system, an ecological descriptor, and it sort of invokes a science of biology which applies to human populations, a way of studying human populations in their individuality according to their ecology, the way that they interact with nature. So like I was saying, this book, Other Natures, goes into quite a bit of detail about this, and brings up a lot of, I think, really insightfully recognized examples in Herodotus, who everybody thinks about as this historian of nomoi or customs, but who's also really interested in bioi, in lifestyles. He talks about, for instance, the lifestyle of the Egyptians, which is dictated by their relationship to the Nile. It's an ecological relationship between people and rivers. Or the lifestyle, the bios of the Ethiopians, the macrobioi Ethiopians, the long-lived Ethiopians who get their food from the table of the sun. It just comes from the sun. It's a great way to get fed, but their customs and their long lives are in a way determined by this way of getting food. So when you start thinking about human diversity in terms of BOI, then that too prompts a kind of reflection again on the local bios, the lifestyle that we live in, for instance, Santa Cruz. And maybe you start to think, hey, that lifestyle is kind of fucked up. If we get our food from like crystal shops and slumlording, this is perhaps a bad bios. But if we want to adopt someone else's bios, that's not just like a plug and play thing. It requires a substantial change to our whole way of life. And ends to landlordism, a refusal to believe in crystal magic and such like things, and perhaps even quitting yoga. So the change that the bios requires of the person is actually much more substantial if we want to adopt someone else's bios than if we want to borrow a nomos or something like that. And bios is also an interesting category for kind of thinking about historical diversity, the diversity of human populations over time. There's a guy who was a student of Aristotle named Dicaearchus, who develops this theory. He's got canonically these three different bioi. He talks about the Golden Age, where people just eat stuff that they find on the ground because there's enough of it that you can just grab things and eat them. In the Golden Age, by the way, people don't poop. I guess because they're just eating things from the ground, and if you just eat things from the ground, you don't poop. But if you're eating meat, as people do in the next bios, the pastoral bios, then you do start to poop. And this is a style of life in which people domesticate animals and find them delicious. It's kind of the same as the nomadism invoked by Aristotle in his discussion of bios, but Dicaearchus sees this as belonging to a stage of historical development, being characteristic of the past. And then finally, he talks about agriculture as a bios. So that's just the final bios in the list that we get from our very fragmentary sources on Dicaearchus. There probably are others. It's not clear how he moves from agriculture in general to the specific bios helados, the lifestyle of Greece, which is the subject of the book in which these categories appear. There are other things in this chain which we just don't have any record of. So some people see Dicaearchus as viewing this movement between BOI as a kind of historical progress. It's really unclear whether that's actually his view. He does seem to believe that there are disadvantages to the movement from one stage to another. The example of pooping in the stage of pastoralism is one such advantage, because if you don't poop, you're much more healthy, according to the canons of ancient medicine, I guess. Well, there's some conflict about that. I might do another lecture on Hippocratic proof theory, but suffice it to say that's one example of the way in which life gets worse even as progress takes place. So there's a kind of an irony attached to this notion of progress. So a loss goes along with the movement from one bios to another. And Pliny has a very similar set of concepts that he's working with. His version of the same kind of ethnographic category is luxury. When he's talking about luxury, he's talking about basically the bios of Rome. This historically specific Roman ecology, Roman way of interacting with nature, Roman way of acquiring not just basic food items, but also other products of nature like pearls, elephant tusks, beaver testicles, lynx piss, and who knows what other weird glands. All of this stuff comes to Rome from its empire. It's an imperial ecology, and it is, on Pliny's view, deeply fucked up. An unfortunate result of Roman imperial progress that may even render science, as Pliny wishes to conduct it, kind of impossible. Which isn't to say that there's a certain amount of progress that goes alongside this. Progress in the arts, progress in connoisseurship, progress in quality of life, even, on Pliny's own testimony. So here, too, there's a form of progress from one bios to another. The former rural purity of Rome and its subsequent development into luxury that has a kind of an irony attached to it. But the bios is a useful way of thinking about lifestyle as ecology and reflecting on human diversity not only over space but across time. And for that reason, it's not a bad way for us to approach the ancient world either, right? Because we are kind of interested in figuring out what basically the bios was like in the past. What was the bios of Aros? What really was the lifestyle of Greece? What was the bios of Rome? And of course, one can ask that question of a whole range of different places that are not Greece, that are not Rome, without any kind of loss of specificity. So this approach that Boccaccio has brought out in these ancient historians and ethnographers is one that I think also can be useful for us reflecting on the past. We're interested not just in what people did or said, but fundamentally how they lived. How did they get along with nature? That means figuring out also how nature looked to them, and that's really where my kind of interest in Pliny the Elder comes from. Anyway, I hope you haven't found that too dull. We'll see how many of these I can squeeze out of Pliny the Elder this quarter. I do hope to see everyone back here next week, same time, same place.